Teal independents say they will back an Indigenous voice to Parliament regardless of the result of a nationwide referendum. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says he would not rule out legislating a voice to Parliament, but not before a referendum is held. The Nationals leader, David Littleproud, says ignoring the result of a failed referendum would be disrespectful to Australian democracy. Independent Zali Steggall says although a no vote would deny Indigenous Australians constitutional recognition, she will support a legislative bill. Well, as we just have heard earlier in the week, Anthony Albanese is refusing to rule out legislating an Indigenous voice if a referendum does fail. But we're not quite there yet, although he says he won't even entertain the idea of a no vote prevailing, leaving it to the rest of Parliament to clash over hypotheticals at the moment. So joining me live is Director of From the Heart campaign, Dean Parkin. We've missed you over Christmas, Dean, so great to have you back. This debate has got well ahead of itself. Where do we start? Because I think we need to remind people that a referendum is just about voting for recognition.
That's exactly right, Laura. We've got to go back to the start of this and remind everybody that this fundamentally started about dealing with this question of recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the Constitution as the first peoples of this country. And the really important thing to know about that is that there is significant support, both bipartisan political support for this. We've had 15 years of bipartisan support for this question. And there is significant support of the Australian population for this very simple idea that after more than 200 years, we should finally recognise Indigenous peoples in the Constitution. Indeed, Peter Dutton in the last week has reconfirmed his support for constitutional recognition. And also, we are obviously talking about an Indigenous voice to Parliament so that we can get to the substantive issues facing many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities. So it's really important to remind people that that's the starting point for all of this discussion about the referendum on the voice. Yeah,
so the two things are, should there be recognition? Should there be a voice? I guess the leap is being made from politicians at the moment. What will the voice look like? What will, recognition look like? Is that a fair enough question at this point?
Well, we've got to actually ask ourselves, what are the Australian people going to be asked when they step inside that polling booth on referendum day sometime later this year? What are we asking them to decide on? And we have to be very clear about that. As you say, there are two things we're going to be asking them. We're going to be asking them, do they think we should have Indigenous constitutional recognition? And do we think that there should be an Indigenous voice? And it'll be a very simple yes-no question. One of the things we won't be asking voters, we're not going to be asking them to vote on or decide on a particular model of a voice, of the details of the voice. That's something that the Parliament will be tasked with doing following the referendum, following the successful referendum, I might add. And we also know that there's an incredible amount of work that's already led to that point so far. So the Parliament won't be starting from scratch. They'll be using the Langton-Calma report. They'll be using other work that's been done to flesh out exactly what a voice will look like. So it'll be a very simple question. The Australian people will know exactly what they're voting on. I think we have to remind everybody that's what the question will be when we all step into that polling booth on referendum day.
Yeah, absolutely. The Prime Minister got in a little bit of trouble this week when he was asked, what if the vote came back and the answer was no from the Australian people, would you still legislate? And he essentially said yes. Is that a problem, do you think?
Oh, look, I'm not a politician nor a commentator, Laura.
Nor do we want you to be, Dean. Nor do we want you to be.
We know that they are furiously speculating on hypotheticals about what may or may not happen. We're just simply focused on the referendum. It's a big opportunity for all the nation. And look, we fundamentally believe that the Australian people are absolutely smart enough. They're absolutely savvy enough to understand what's going to be asked of them. And we know that there's an enormous amount of goodwill there, so that when they step into that voting booth on referendum day, they'll be asked that very simple question, do they support recognising Indigenous people and do they support a voice? And we think that with the information at hand and the information yet to come, there's a very good chance that the Australian population will vote yes to those questions.
Okay, we're going to be talking about this a lot, hopefully weekly, Dean Parkin, over the next couple of months. Let's hope it's not years. But the voice, recognition, what power do you want that to come with for Indigenous people?
Well, the first thing that we want is we want the Australian people to give their mandate that the voice must exist. I mean, that is the really important thing, because that's been lacking in previous efforts at establishing a voice, and it's always lacking when people start wanting to talk about legislating a voice, which is not a proposal on the table right now, is that the Australian people are cut out of that conversation. And that's why a referendum is so important, because we actually want the power of the Australian people behind this to say, yes, the voice should exist, and then leave it to the Parliament, as I said, to do the substantive detail of that. But we want this voice to be really focused on the key issues facing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We're soon going to hear more about progress on closing the gap. We know there's an incredible amount of work still outstanding there. People want to see real change. They want to see acceleration of change. And that's what the voice is all about, making sure that Indigenous people have a real say over those issues.
Well, Dean Parkin, thanks so much for taking the noise out of the debate at the moment. We'll speak to you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Laura.